Tonight, Tehran is literally ablaze. Not figuratively, not just a dramatic phrase. Actual, massive orange fireballs and thick black smoke columns are rising over the Iranian capital, visible for miles. Local residents have recorded the scenes on their phones, capturing the chaos of 8 continuous nights filled with explosions. And the war that ignited on February 28th, initially targeting 500 sites, has now escalated into a new and far deadlier phase. They've named it Operation Epic Fury, and Phase 2 has officially begun. This phase made its presence known by simultaneously setting several critical sites ablaze. The Shan Fuel Facility in northwest Tehran, the Kuhak Oil Depot, the Karaj Fuel Complex to the west of the capital, and a storage site in Tehran's southern Char-Raid district, close to the city's main oil refinery. Israeli Air Force jets unleashed 230 bombs on Iranian targets that night, lighting up the sky with gigantic fireballs visible alongside thick smoke plumes next to Adi Tower, one of Tehran's most iconic landmarks. This marks the first time during these 8 days of conflict that Israel has directly targeted Iran's energy infrastructure on Iranian soil itself. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, made clear their reasoning. These fuel complexes belong to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Iran's military relies on these fuel reserves to power its various military operations. By striking these sites, the damage inflicted on the Iranian regime's military infrastructure is significantly deepened. But Iran was swift to retaliate. Within hours, the IRGC launched barren ballistic missiles targeting the Haifa oil refinery in northern Israel. A precise and direct response. Refinery for refinery, energy infrastructure for energy infrastructure. Overseeing this phase of the conflict is Israeli Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General al-Zamir, who ominously declared, "We have additional surprises." If you're just tuning in and want to stay ahead of the most critical military and energy development unfolding anywhere in the world right now, make sure to like this and subscribe immediately. Because what unfolded on Saturday, March 7th, 2026, is not just another repetitive day in the war. It's the dawn of a second chapter. This chapter's final outcomes are yet unwritten, but its impact on Iran's military strength, economic stability, Israeli cities, and the global oil market will shape the next week more profoundly than anything we've seen so far. Every verified fact in this report is crucial, often more reliable and impactful than most coverage you'll encounter today. Allow me to guide you through what exactly was targeted, why hitting Tehran's oil infrastructure represents a strategic escalation unlike anything before, and where Operation Epic Fury's Phase 2 is steering this warfare as it enters its second week. To grasp why these strikes against Tehran's IRGC fuel complexes on Saturday night mark a genuine strategic escalation, not just a continuation of previous attacks, you must appreciate the careful and deliberate distinction the IDF is drawing here. Carefully and with full awareness of the enormous implications crossing this line entails, the American-Israeli campaign during the first week of Operation Epic Fury zeroed in on what military strategists classify as hard military targets. These included Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile launchers, air defense systems, command and control networks, leadership compounds, IRGC headquarters, and its naval fleet. The mission was clear: to degrade Iran's capacity for warfare and eliminate the leadership behind its nuclear program and proxy networks. By international humanitarian law standards, these targets are legitimate military objectives. No institution, whether in Geneva, the UN Security Council, or the International Court of Justice, could reasonably argue that hitting an IRGC missile launcher or air defense radar violates the laws of armed conflict. However, the fuel complexes struck on Saturday night occupy a more nuanced legal and political territory. and the IDF is fully aware of this delicate balance. This awareness is precisely why official IDF statements went to great lengths emphasizing that the targeted sites are directly linked to Iran's military-industrial complex. The IRGC's takeover of significant sections of Iran's oil sector in recent years is a crucial factor here, as these facilities reportedly supply fuel specifically to military entities. The IDF makes an important distinction. These are military fuel depots, not civilian energy infrastructures. This distinction carries substantial weight, both legally and politically, because it differentiates Phase 2 as an internationally justifiable military operation from Phase 2 being construed as a deliberate attack on civilian economic infrastructure, which would violate international law. Whether this distinction withstands scrutiny is a matter the IAEA, United Nations, and the international legal community will rigorously evaluate, just as intensely as the IRGC is analyzing the Heifer refinery at this very moment. Now, it becomes essential to grasp what the IRGC fuel complex targeting reveals about the future trajectory of Phase 2 IDF. We are now approaching Day 9, marking 8 full days since the United States and Israel launched the largest joint military operation in modern history. On Saturday, CENTCOM confirmed that US forces alone have struck over 3,000 targets inside Iran, an astonishing number achieved within just 8 days. The initial week's targets were primarily military in nature. On Saturday night, sites like the Shan Oil Depot, Kuhak Complex, Courage Fuel Facility, and a storage site near Tehran's main refinery in Char were all struck. Iranian opposition reports mention that as many as 30 sites across Tehran and the surrounding provinces were targeted simultaneously, according to Iran's Ministry of Oil. This figure of 30 sites underscores the immense scale of Saturday's Phase 2 operations, signaling a significant expansion in the campaign's scope and intensity. This wasn't just a quick targeted strike on a couple of IRGC fuel depots to send a message. No, it was a full-scale, comprehensive assault aimed squarely at the fuel infrastructure that powers the immense military machine the IRGC has meticulously built over years within Tehran's energy sector. This infiltration began as the IRGC steadily inserted itself into Iran's civilian economy, turning energy into a strategic military asset. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu confirmed that Phase 2 of their campaign was underway. He openly declared that Israel is now shifting gears, moving to dismantle more of Iran's military infrastructure. In his own words, Netanyahu hinted that we have many surprises ahead. These aren't the usual vague promises or theatrical press statements. Alongside Netanyahu's announcement, Israeli intelligence chief Zamir also spoke of additional surprises, details he specifically chose not to reveal. Together, these statements signal a coordinated military campaign, one confident it has gained enough air supremacy over Iranian airspace to systematically target categories of infrastructure that were untouched during the initial phase. Supporting these claims, the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, issued a stark statement. We struck over 3,000 targets, and we are not slowing down. This language leaves no room for doubt or interpretation regarding the intensity and trajectory of what lies ahead. Now, shifting focus to the heart of the conflict. Tehran. On Saturday night, reports came from the city itself, brought to the world by the first American television journalist to report live from the Iranian capital since this war began. CNN's Frederick Pleitgen, accompanied by photojournalist Claudia Otto, the first U.S. network crew on the ground in Tehran during this conflict, painted a vivid picture of a city caught between widespread destruction and remarkable resilience. Residents described the city's air as thick with smoke since Saturday night. A university student from Western Tehran, speaking to the Associated Press under the condition of anonymity due to security fears, explained how the city is under relentless bombardment. Even people far from military and government targets are living in constant fear, they said. Funerals for members of Iran's security forces have been held across the country throughout the week, mourning those lost in the ongoing campaign. Metro stations, which the city had previously upgraded to serve as bomb shelters during the 12-day war in June 2025, continue to operate, offering some refuge. Meanwhile, Tehran's governor, Mohammad Sadegh Motahari, has urged residents to avoid stockpiling necessities, aiming to prevent panic and keep markets stable. This appeal alone sheds light on the fragile state of the city's supply chains and marketplaces. Imagine a city where the internet has been nearly non-existent for over a week, where in the first 48 hours of the conflict, roughly 100,000 people fled, and where smoke from massive oil depot fires, ignited early Saturday morning, has silently drifted over residential neighborhoods since 3 a.m. Tragically, more than 400 people have been confirmed dead in Iran since the campaign's inception, as reported by the Iranian Red Crescent Society, a number that continues to climb with each new wave of airstrikes. Meanwhile, CENTCOM reports over 3,000 targets successfully struck so far. With Phase 2 now officially launched, hitting key elements within the oil sector, Netanyahu's promise of many surprises is sending shockwaves through energy markets, ministries, and governments across Europe and Asia. The targeting of Tehran's crucial infrastructure underscores the looming threat and uncertainty gripping the global energy landscape. On Saturday night, the targeting of the IRGC's fuel infrastructure sends a clear and powerful message. Phase 2 of Operation Epic Fury is poised to strike at Iran's energy sector in ways that Phase 1 intentionally avoided. Iran is home to some of the largest proven oil and gas reserves on the planet. Its oil infrastructure, comprising refineries, storage depots, export terminals, and pipeline networks, is not only the economic lifeblood sustaining the current Iranian government, but also forms the very foundation for any future government that might take power. Amidst this, an extraordinary statement came from a White House official. On the same night, Israeli jets were bombing Tehran's fuel depots, a statement that has been drastically underreported. The United States intends to secure all Iranian oil, effectively preventing the current regime from maintaining control over this vital asset. This declaration, made in tandem with the airstrikes, is not simply a military operational update. It is a strategic political economic announcement about Iran's future post-conflict landscape. Essentially, the Trump administration is publicly signaling that Operation Epic Fury's endgame involves transferring control of Iranian petroleum assets away from the Islamic Republic and into the hands of the eventual governance structure that emerges after the regime's fall. By framing oil as a strategic asset to be secured rather than merely a target to be degraded, the scope of Operation Epic Fury extends far beyond just neutralizing Iran's nuclear program or degrading missile infrastructure. Remarkably, just 8 days ago, this conflict officially began with the stated aims of targeting Iran's nuclear capabilities and missile systems. Fast forward to Saturday night. Israeli jets were striking oil depots in Tehran, and a White House official announced a plan to secure all Iranian oil assets. In the span of a little over a week, the conflict's declared objectives have escalated, from nuclear non-proliferation to regime change, and now to outright energy sector control, with each expansion of goals being disclosed through formal press releases and official statements, almost as if this had been the plan all along. However, an even more consequential development unfolded on Saturday, one that might prove more strategically significant than the Shahran oil depot fire itself. A fracture emerged within Iran's surviving leadership. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian publicly apologized for Iran's missile and drone attacks on neighboring Gulf Arab states, even as those attacks continued. Meanwhile, hardliners within the regime insisted that Tehran's war strategy remained unchanged. Pause to consider this. The president, one of the three members of the Transitional Governing Council overseeing Iran since Kam's death and the most publicly visible civilian figure, issued a direct apology for strikes on Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait. This unprecedented admission signals cracks within the leadership and hints at emerging internal debates regarding Iran's future war conduct and diplomatic posture. On the very same day, GC unleashed its most intense barrage of the week on Qatar, while simultaneously targeting Kuwait's Ali Sound Air Base. This stark contrast, two conflicting signals coming from two members of the same three-person governing council, reveals more than just miscommunication. The civilian president issued a formal apology, yet IRGC military commanders escalated the attacks unabated. This isn't a mere breakdown in messaging. It's evidence of a deeply fractured governing body, split along the very fault lines analysts predicted from the Transitional Council's inception. On one side stands the political leadership, keenly aware that the RG's strikes against Gulf neighbors have irreparably damaged Iran's regional relationships and must be halted. On the other side are the IRGC military commanders, convinced these attacks represent Iran's last strategic leverage, unwilling to cease their actions regardless of the president's public stance. This clash between Pezeshkian's apology and the IRGC's ongoing bombardment serves as the visible symptom of a far deeper institutional struggle within what remains of the Islamic Republic. It's a battle between those seeking survival through diplomatic solutions and those who believe enduring the conflict demands fighting to the bitter end, no matter the cost. Amidst this turmoil, a new dimension has emerged involving China, attracting intense scrutiny from sanctions enforcement experts and governments alike as they try to gauge the real boundaries of Beijing's declared neutrality. Two cargo ships, owned by an Iranian company tied directly to Tehran's ballistic missile program, recently departed from the Gaolan chemical storage port in southern China, setting course for Iran. According to the Washington Post, these vessels are operated by the state-owned Islamic Republic of Iran Shipping Lines, a company under sanctions imposed by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. Gaolan Port is known as a hub for materials essential in rocket fuel production, making the cargo particularly sensitive. Despite this, Chinese authorities could have detained these ships, delayed their clearance, or enacted any number of administrative freezes. But they did none of these. Isaac Carden from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace told the Washington Post plainly, "That is a deliberate policy choice made during an active war in which Beijing publicly calls for restraint." China's public calls for restraint contrast sharply with its decision to allow sanctioned Iranian vessels carrying crucial chemical precursors for missile production to leave its ports. This scenario provides perhaps the clearest operational illustration of what Beijing's neutrality truly means. It indicates that China will not directly provide weapons or deploy troops. It will publicly condemn attacks and advocate for ceasefire resolutions within the UN Security Council. Yet simultaneously, it will permit sanctioned shipments to continue, facilitating the sustained missile strikes Iran carries out against American bases and cities across the Gulf. This approach reflects China's calculated judgment that the strategic consequences of severing Iran's supply chain outweigh the reputational damage of being exposed for inaction. The departure of these two ships from a Chinese port amid ongoing conflict highlights Beijing's complex, balancing act and reveals the practical limits of its declared neutrality. China lecturing the world on restraint is perhaps the most candid acknowledgement of its true stance in this war. To truly understand the stakes, let's examine the recent events in Baghdad's Green Zone. a crucial link bridging the Iraq dimension of this conflict to the direct safety of American diplomats, far beyond just the Gulf military bases. On Saturday, a missile struck the helicopter landing pad inside the United States Embassy complex, nestled within Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone. This marks the first confirmed missile impact inside the Green Zone since the start of the Iranian war. 3 Iraqi security officials, speaking anonymously because they lacked authorization to publicly comment, confirmed the attack. Iraq's caretaker Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, condemned the incident as a terrorist act perpetrated by rogue groups, a carefully chosen phrase. It reflects his political tightrope. As an Iraqi leader, he cannot be seen openly supporting an Iranian-backed militia's strike on an American diplomatic site. Yet he also lacks the full capacity to dismantle the militia networks behind the assault. Since the war began, Iran and Iraqi militias allied with it have launched dozens of attacks targeting US military bases and facilities across Iraq. Iraq plays a dual and deeply conflicted role in this war. It is the geographic corridor facilitating Kurdish forces preparing to enter Iran, an action President Trump openly supported on Saturday, saying he would be all for it. At the very same time, Iraq serves as the launch pad for Iranian-backed militias, directing strikes against American targets. This inherent contradiction, Iraq being the staging ground both for US-aligned Kurdish forces attacking Iran and for Iranian-backed militias attacking US positions, lies at the heart of America's fraught relationship with Baghdad in this conflict. The missile strike inside the Green Zone exposes this contradiction as irreconcilable for both the Iraqi government and the U.S. Embassy, given their current diplomatic and military tools. Now let's take an unvarnished look at what the retaliation against the Haifa oil refinery reveals about the specific dangers looming in the next phase of this war. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, confirmed it targeted the Haifa oil refinery in northern Israel, using Kashak missiles, a response directly linked to Israeli airstrikes on Iranian oil facilities. Here, oil infrastructure was targeted in direct reprisal for attacks on similar Iranian energy sites. The Kashak, translating to Fortress Buster, ranks among Iran's most formidable medium-range ballistic missiles. Iran's decision to retaliate against an energy facility with a strike on energy infrastructure is no coincidence. It is a deliberate, doctrinal strategy known as mirroring. The concept of doctrinal mirroring, especially within the energy infrastructure sphere, poses the most alarming escalation dynamic emerging from this conflict. If Israel broadens the scope of Phase 2, strikes to include more of Iran's oil and gas infrastructure, such as export terminals, major refineries, and pipeline networks, and Iran responds by targeting Israeli or Gulf energy assets in exactly the same manner. The conflict, let's consider a more dire scenario, one where the disruption to the global oil supply caused by this conflict is not merely about disturbances in the Strait of Hormuz shipping lanes. Instead, it escalates to the systematic physical destruction of the production and refining capacities of the Middle East's largest oil producers, occurring simultaneously. Imagine the oil infrastructure of Iran, Israel, and the Gulf states, all being methodically damaged in a relentless cycle of mirrored retaliation. This is no ordinary escalation. This scenario would send oil prices soaring not just to $80 a barrel, but to a level so high, so politically destabilizing, that no economist dares to put the exact number into print. It's simply too volatile to express in public numbers. Now, let's turn our attention to this week's U.S. intelligence assessment. the institutional benchmark by which every claim about the strategic success of this military operation must be measured. Before the war even began, U.S. intelligence analyses found that an assault on Iran was unlikely to topple the regime. This was highlighted by reports on Saturday. The same intelligence community, whose briefers frankly told congressional staff that Iran had no plans to strike American forces unless Israel attacked first, stands as a critical counterbalance to public statements from figures like Hegseth and Netanyahu. Both leaders have touted this operation as building towards a decisive military conclusion, but the intelligence assessment paints a more nuanced picture. By every traditional military metric, this campaign has been overwhelmingly successful. 80% of Iran's air defenses are destroyed, 60% of its missile launch capabilities degraded, 30 naval vessels sunk, and more than 3,000 targets struck. These are staggering numbers, indicative of a military onslaught measured and effective. And yet, the intelligence community's pre-war assessment still views these tactical victories as unlikely to dismantle the deeply entrenched Iranian regime. This is a critical distinction, not a contradiction. From one perspective, the U.S. and Israel have achieved in just 8 days what no modern Middle Eastern military has before: overwhelming tactical military success. From another, the Islamic Republic of Iran, a 47-year-old revolutionary government, exhibits remarkable structural resilience. It has deep-rooted institutions, a robust domestic coercive apparatus, and a population that has been conditioned for a generation to view the U.S. and Israel as existential enemies. Coupled with a revolutionary ideology that esteems martyrdom as a noble calling rather than a deterrent, this is a regime built to endure. Bombs can obliterate fuel depots and cripple infrastructure, but they cannot single-handedly replace a government. Looking ahead to the larger picture as Phase 2 unfolds, the conflict now operates on 5 simultaneous tracks. The outcome of these will determine whether Operation Epic Fury ends with the strategic result the White House describes or falls into the prolonged, multi-year quagmire the intelligence community has warned about. Chief among these is the military track, Phase 2, which promises more surprises in targeting oil infrastructure. Netanyahu and Zamir remain tight-lipped about specific developments. Meanwhile, Kurdish forces, potentially entering Iran from Iraq with American endorsement, and a continued. The ongoing Israeli ground offensive in southern Lebanon marks the 4th day of intense conflict with Hezbollah, which has been actively engaged in this war since the beginning.